Talk, Twitter, and a very tight race. Is this the new face of Kenyan elections? You're with the Arise News Hour, and our top story is the countdown to voting in East Africa's biggest economy. After the second and final debate, the experts say it is too close to call between the leading candidates, Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta. We have a report from Nairobi.
Also in the program tonight, why the mountains of Mali could provide a perfect haven for Islamic militants. And Bill Clinton on children, schools, and poverty at the This Day Awards in Nigeria. Plus, stand aside, just one way to mark the end of the Chinese New Year's celebrations.
Now, they'll be counting the votes in Kenya this time next week. The election has now entered its final countdown, with the second televised debate featuring all 8 candidates. The two leaders remain neck and neck, but what struck observers was the civilized nature of the talking. The real fear is a repeat of the violence which followed the election in 2007 and left over 1,000 dead.
So far, this has been dubbed the TV and Twitter campaign. We'll have special coverage over the next few days as Kenya gets ready and most of Africa looks on. On the agenda in the debate, land reform and corruption. Watching for us in Nairobi, our East Africa correspondent, Tom Walsh.
And now, we welcome our moderators, Udwak Amimo and Joe Ageo.
First the moderators and then the candidates. Kenya's final presidential debate ahead of elections on Monday was dominated by questions on land reform and corruption.
I want to state that clearly I have not been involved in any impropriety in government.
Individuals around me may have gotten money. Mr. Mwite did not get any money whatsoever.
Thank you for your sincerity pertaining your questions on integrity and leadership. But did you expect a thief to tell you I've stolen?
At the moment, the current expenditure is just too high. You're just consuming. We will actually recommend not just a freeze, but reduction. And I will begin with myself. I will have the pay of the president so that I can lead by example.
In the newspapers,
Current President Mwai Kibaki is stepping down after 2 terms in office. The two main contenders to replace him are current Prime Minister Raila Odinga and his deputy Uhuru Kenyatta, but he faces trial for crimes against humanity. Kenyatta has been summoned to appear at the International Criminal Court at The Hague in April for his alleged role in fueling the violence which broke out after the 2007 elections. More than 1,200 people were killed after the poll led to ethnic violence and forced 300,000 from their homes.
Till to date, save for the rumors that have been peddled around, nobody has ever pointed out and said that I have been involved in impropriety in land anywhere in this country.
But his opponents did not let the opportunity to attack pass them by.
We have got people here running for this in these elections who have got cases. My brother has got cases, issues on land ownership. There are others who have got cases in land. You cannot allow hyena to protect your goats.
After the debate, the candidates were joined on stage by their families. They already know they have their support. But the support they need is that of millions of Kenyans across the country who watch the proceedings.
I think some of the issues were raised, but I think part of the problem with this, especially with this phase of the debate, was that it was dealing a lot with, personal scandals, which, although I admit it was important for the general public to know what happened in each of those scandals, but they took a higher precedence to the real issues. So by the end of the debate, it felt like, we just ended up learning a bit about the different scandals each of them was involved in without really tackling the issues. At the end of the day, there are more questions than answers.
Kenyans will go to the polls on Monday.
Now, Tom joins us live by Skype from Nairobi with all the latest updates. Tom, a statistical dead heat going into the final days before poll date. What's the mood like on the ground?
Yeah, Kenya is pretty tense at the moment. As you said, it is neck and neck. And this last presidential live televised debate last night was a chance for the country to really get the final image of who they can vote for. And even though I said in a previous report during the first debate that, many people would still vote along ethnic lines, because now it is so close between Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta, what happened last night could prove, the breaking point in making one of these candidates go just slightly ahead in margin in the polls and succeeding.
Tom, we're talking about this election being a Twitter and social media election. You could tell from the trending after the second debate that it was one of the highest trending topics worldwide. Have you seen this? Is this what's happening? A lot of people getting on social media and airing their views and discussing this election?
Kenyans are incredibly vocal on social media. They love their Facebook. They love their Twitter. Even during the first live presidential debate, there were 40 tweets a second on the hashtags that were concerned around that debate. So yes, it's very big, but that is also a big headache for the government here. The government is trying to crack down on any kind of hate speech because they say it was due to that hate speech that we saw the violence that we did see in 2007. So what they're doing is they're using social media to monitor what is being said in the public domain about these elections so that they can avoid a repeat of what we saw with, as you said, the thousands who died and even more who were displaced.
Indeed, Tom. And at the same time, it's more than likely that there will be no outright winner because I guess the winner needs 50 plus 1% under the new constitution. What happens then?
Yeah, as you say, Jeff, it's unlikely that we're going to see an outright winner after Monday. In fact, to be honest, the story only just gets going on Monday. Afterwards, if there is no outright winner, then we get a runoff, which will be around the 10th or 11th of April. But interestingly enough, that exact date is also when the ICC indicted criminals Uhuru Kenyatta and his running mate William Ruto are due to appear at The Hague. So we're going to have to keep a close eye on what exactly happens and how this whole election process moves forward.
Indeed, Tom, and definitely we'll have more on Kenya in the second half of the program. Tom Walsh there joining us from Skype in Nairobi, Kenya. Debbie.
All right, Jeff, thank you so much. Fighting between French troops and Islamic militants has moved to the mountains in northern Mali. Experts say that it's a perfect setting for guerrilla warfare. And France's defense minister admits it could lead to a protracted campaign. Arise News' Will Took reports.
In Gao, the smoke hasn't cleared yet over the town's marketplace. Once a bustling centre of the community, it was razed to the ground during some of the Mali conflict's most intense fighting. As the residents of Gao begin to clean up, steps are being taken to ensure that Islamic militants don't return. The mayor and the French military are enlisting neighbourhood leaders to help maintain security in the town.
The French will not be able to bring us peace, even if we do not find it amongst ourselves. That means denouncing accomplices, denouncing wrongdoers among us, so that they can continue their mission in other areas.
And that mission is taking French troops here, Adrat de Ifogas, in northern Mali. The 250,000 square kilometre region is a desolate collection of mountains and valleys, honeycombed with a network of caves. It's in this terrain that Mali's remaining jihadists are believed to be holed up. The French defence minister is warning clearing the region will be the most difficult part of the Malian campaign.
The area that you mentioned, Adrat des Ifogas, is more than a quarter of the size of France, so you can't take it in 3 days, even if there are just pockets of jihadi presence. But we've always known that in order to take the liberation of this country to its conclusion, that we have to attack these pockets in this difficult part of the Malian territory.
Whilst France is expected to begin a withdrawal from Mali next month, Le Drian told French radio, as long as the fighting in the mountains continues, it's too early to talk of a quick exit. Will Took, Arise News.
Now, the French campaign in Mali might have encouraged a kidnapping beyond its borders. Nigerian terrorist group Boko Haram has now said it took a French family, including 4 children, in Cameroon last week. In a video posted on the internet that shows the hostages, the terrorists demanded the immediate release of militants taken prisoner in Mali. The French authorities say they won't do a deal.
We do not negotiate on that kind of basis with these kind of groups. We will use all possible means to ensure that the hostages are freed, these ones or others. That's what we'll do. But we don't play that sort of bidding games, because that's terrorism.
David Lewis is Reuters West Africa correspondent. He is in Dakar, Senegal, and he joins us now on the phone. David, you've seen the video posted on the internet. What's the response? The French insist that they will not negotiate with terrorists?
Well, as you say, yep, and the French are saying very clearly that they won't negotiate, and that the hostages, which include 4 young children, will be released through other means. It still remains very confused. There's still some speculation as to whether the gunmen who are holding the hostages and say they're speaking for Boko Haram speak for all of the group. The group is fragmented. So there's still a lot of confusion surrounding this incident. But what it clearly does do is highlight the dangers for French nationals across West Africa, as thousands of French troops carry out this operation in Mali.
Absolutely. And speaking of Mali, David, it looks like the Islamic militants there are staging counterattacks. Nothing that was unexpected, because everyone, I guess, was waiting for the French to pull out, and they are pulling out next month. These incursions are definitely not going to end anytime soon, are they?
No, I mean, I think obviously the fighting, there have been several attacks on the town of Gao, and these attacks will test the French resolve and whether the French really will start pulling out next month. I was there for one of them several weeks ago, and the French were forced to intervene to help Mali's army snuff out these pockets of resistance in the town of Gao. So the situation is still very, very fragile there. And as you suggested, up in the mountains in the Adra de Fougas, we're seeing some extremely heavy fighting up there. The Chadian forces that are doing most of the fighting have themselves suffered heavy losses. They lost 23 soldiers. They say they've inflicted numerous casualties on the Islamists that are hiding up there. But the scale of the fighting, the seriousness of the fighting, it clearly shows that we're a long way from this ending.
A long way indeed, David. At the same time, the African Union has to get its act together and send in more troops, more firepower, doesn't it?
It does indeed. African forces are supposedly at 70% in the country, but this mission has been dogged from the very beginning with delays over financing, the lack of training, the lack of logistics for troops on the ground. And we're seeing this at every stage at the moment. The French are eager to hand this over to AFISMA, as the African mission is called. But at the moment, that reality is a long way off. Only yesterday, the African troops were appealing for hundreds of millions of dollars in financing. But the gap between what has been committed and what is needed is huge. And on the ground, the gap between what the French are doing and what the African troops are going to have to take on remains just as big.
No doubt, David. Looks like this conflict is definitely going to get a lot worse before it gets any better. That's David Lewis, Reuters West Africa correspondent, talking to us on the phone there from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you, David.
And Jason Pack is president of the LibyaAnalysis.com. He specializes in North Africa, and he says Libya's role in the Mali conflict should not be overlooked, which is such an interesting point. Jason, welcome to Arise News. We appreciate you coming. I think you would agree with this, that we cannot accurately or effectively address the conflict in Mali without also addressing what's going on in Libya.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's happened as a result of the Arab Spring is that, yes, many people have gotten more freedom than they had previously, but the state structures in every Arab Spring country have been weakened. And whether it's Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, or Mali, state structures that may have been dictatorial before had a kind of security apparatus. They provided basic services. Those state structures no longer function. And you're getting, of course, ungoverned space. And in Libya, the impact of this ungoverned space was much more profound because there were hundreds of thousands of small arms and tens of thousands of pieces of artillery and rebel fighters and Islamists flowing in and out of the country. So combine that with the implosion of state structures across the whole region, and obviously arms and jihadists can flow in and out of Libya almost at will.
I was just going to say, so it seems like that it's just this porous border, if you will, that the Islamists, the extremists can sort of go back to Libya, regroup, and then come right back into Mali.
That's exactly right. And in fact, the attack on In Amenas, the gas facility in southern Algeria, was no doubt masterminded by groups based in Libya. The training was conducted in Libya. The arms for that came from Libya. The insurgents in northern Mali, first the Tuareg ones who declared Azawad an independent state, they had served with Gaddafi. Their arms came from Gaddafi's arsenal. And then the Islamists who set up in the wake of the Tuareg, they've also trained and taken arms from Libya. Now, I have a speculation that I can't guarantee is correct, but the French troops have chased out a lot of Islamists. Well, where do they go? They set up in ungoverned spaces in southern Algeria and southern Libya. So even if the French are successful in areas like the northern mountains of Mali, and they may not be, so the Islamists will run across the border, wait for better days until the French pull out, and then return to northern Mali.
Absolutely, and that's where there's an article in the Financial Times last week, I don't know if you saw it, they're calling those badlands, those mountainous areas, France's Tora Bora. These Islamists, these rebels, they will hide out for months, years if they have to, and they will strike at will. This war's not going to end anytime soon.
Well, that's right to make the comparison with other guerrilla wars. It's a guerrilla war, and the Islamists are not dumb. In fact, they've fought campaigns like this many times. So they know not to engage in a direct set-piece battle against French forces. They'll hide into the shadows and find their spot in the desert, and then wait until the moment is right, and in small groups, very fractious groups, even without command and control structures, they'll attack.
Jason, we're running out of time, but in the time we have left, quickly, how armed do you believe these Islamists are? There's a lot of what's known as man-PEDs, man-portable air defense systems that are left over from Gaddafi's regime. Are they heavily gunned?
Well, the interesting thing about a man-PED is that one person with no training can operate it, and you could shoot down a civilian airliner. That's why the U.S. and other Western powers have made so much energy to try to collect and demobilize these man-PEDs. But recent arms captured in Gao, as well as in Timbuktu, show that the Islamist fighters, and I like to use the word jihadists, are actually better armed than the Malayan forces, as well as some of the Chadian armies. So it's going to be a long haul for the Western powers, and a lot of training is going to be needed. So I was happy to see that the French Defense Ministry, even though it's saying that it's going to pull out, which is good, it's going to invest heavily in training forces in Bamako to do the kind of long-term building up of capacity that's required to deal with an insurgency of this nature.
All right, we're going to have to leave it right there for now, but Jason Pack, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jeff.
You're watching Arise News. Well, the only thing we know for sure about Italy's election results is that the country is headed for a new phase of chaotic uncertainty. The vote failed to find a clear winner, and as Arise News' Nick Jennings reports, that raises the possibility of another political crisis in the already debt-ridden country, which could have implications right across Europe.
Italians woke up this morning knowing that despite an 18-month recession, high debt and rising unemployment, the people can't agree on who should sort it out.
It's a mess. It's a big problem. We don't have a government, so elections are a mess as usual. I don't know what will happen. I guess there'll be new elections to see who will govern us. It's a problem. Italy is all a problem.
I'm sorry to say this, but there will be a huge mess. This is just not governable. This government cannot govern.
It's a real problem because the Five-Star Movement is really anti-European and has got a lot of votes, and that's worrying.
Pier Luigi Bersani's centre-left bloc won the lower house vote, but failed to secure a majority in the Senate. Controversial former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi is likely to gain control of the Senate, but control of both houses is needed to govern. And a protest movement led by comedian Beppo Grillo won a quarter of the vote. For the current Prime Minister, Mario Monti, the result has been a disaster. He came a poor fourth with 10% of the vote, but he's putting on a brave face.
It's too early to consider any solution regarding the possibility of an alliance with the Democratic Party, nor does it rest upon me to find one, but right now I consider it essential that there's maximum transparency between the political forces, because we're all faced with a very serious responsibility. The government must ensure transparency for the country.
So now the effort begins to forge a workable coalition, but this could take weeks. It's just what Brussels and the financial markets don't want from Europe's fourth largest economy. Stalemate in one of the Eurozone's biggest players as they try to rescue the single currency. Nick Jennings, Arise News.
The financial markets are led by greed or fear, sometimes both. Today, it's fear. Our business and economics editor, Michael Wilson, has the story.
Thanks, Debbie. Angst and jitters on the global financial markets. They voted in Italy, but no one's won. As the political horse trading begins after an inconclusive election, one thing is for sure: the worry that one of Europe's largest economies will have difficulty in tackling its fundamental budget problems. And that contagion of Euro funk has cascaded into the markets worldwide. In fact, since the Eurozone crisis started, businesses in South Africa, for example, have lost an estimated $15 billion of revenue as Europe has struggled with its debt problems, with 4 in 10 companies affected globally, an increasing number of people and businesses looking to do business elsewhere. According to a recent report from the international consultancy Grant Thornton, 17% of businesses globally now say they are less likely to do business in Europe as a result of the crisis. So as investors look for bolt holes and safe haven assets like the US dollar, US treasuries and German bonds, what does this uncertainty mean for Africa? Well, stocks in Joburg and Lagos fell today, but there were small gains in Nairobi. Some analysts reckon risky assets are likely to remain under pressure until the situation in Italy becomes clearer. Others argue investors are using the Italian poll as an excuse to take profits. I spoke to our correspondent, Sidney Bishop, in Johannesburg, and asked her how the market turmoil had been rattling investors there.
The South African markets were red all over. It was red across the board. And the African markets have not quite reacted very much, as we said, that the liquidity and the capital inflows are quite small in some of the markets in the continent. But the South African market was hit badly, despite the positive GDP figures. The trader I spoke to this afternoon from 28E Capital said it may even last for the whole week, spilling over to next week, because for a while they had forgotten the damage that could be done by the euro crisis.
It looks like a lot of companies in Africa right through the Eurozone crisis have lost a lot of money.
Yes, to quote the Grant Thornton study, at least $2 trillion has been lost in revenue globally, and South Africa itself lost $15 billion in revenue because of the euro crisis. Some of the markets like Spain and Greece are not that big, and the markets managed to shrug them off when they were uncertain. But the uncertainty in Italy of the elections, especially because when they study what is happening in Italy, they feel that the pro-austerity measure parties did not quite make a headway, while the anti-austerity measure parties, they actually made some kind of gains in the election. And that is a huge worry, because it makes the uncertainty to linger in the African markets, especially in the South African markets, because Italy is one of the biggest economies in Europe.
Seems to me that many African companies may be looking elsewhere than Europe for their future business.
Ideally, that's what they should do. Apparently, some of the businesses, at least about 17% of businesses across the globe, some of them in Africa, were saying we are less likely now to trade in Europe. We should diversify. We should look at markets that are actually performing better. We should look at products to export and trade in products that are selling elsewhere either than in Europe. And, you know, they're holding back and they're feeling the pinch because they have lost a lot of revenue. And as long as this this uncertainty continues. Some of them are likely to lose even more. If you look at our mining industry, the South African mining industry and other mining industry, despite their own internal difficulties, their exports revenue have shrunk a lot because of some of the difficulties that are experienced in the Eurozone.
And finally, Sidi, just run through those GDP figures again, if you would.
They were better than expected because economists had expected at least a 1.6% growth, and they came out at 2.5% growth. But it is still very sluggish, considering that the economy has to grow at least by 4 to 5% for it in order to absorb the unemployment, to create jobs, and also to give us a better tax base, because the South African tax base has shrunk a lot. And if you look at the expected budget that's going to be tabled tomorrow, because of this slowdown in the economy, there is very little revenue that the Minister of Finance is going to be able to part with or play with. So the markets that obviously took away a chunk of growth are the mining industry and the agricultural industry, because of the difficulties that were experienced last year. The services sector and the manufacturing sector are the only sectors that have actually boosted growth in the last quarter of 2012.
Sidi Bishop there. Now in the commodities market, Brent crude joined the sell-off, falling to its lowest level since the end of January. Gold rose as the demand for bullion as a safe haven grew, but there's still a lot of caution as traders are waiting for the US Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke to deliver his views on the US economy. A quick check of currencies. The rand rose against the dollar after the South African economy expanded at a faster pace in the final 3 months of last year, Sidi was saying. Elsewhere, $1 will buy you 158 naira or 87.9 Kenyan shillings. That's the business for now. Still to come, the chief executives who thinks working from home is nothing less than skiving.
We'll have that story later on.
That's right.
Yeah.
See you later, Michael.
We'll look forward to it.
News from further afield. Syria's opposition has agreed to attend talks on the future of the country in Rome after the US and UK promised what they said was specific aid to the Syrian people. The main opposition group said it would boycott the talks because of what it felt was the world's silence over the violence. Heather Scott reports.
Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!
Exploding in a ball of flames before spiralling out of control, a Syrian Air Force helicopter shot down by rebel fighters. Using captured rocket launchers and tanks, they launched a fresh offensive on a police academy just outside Aleppo over the weekend. The upsurge in violence comes as Bashar al-Assad's regime indicated that it would be willing to sit down with rebels to discuss the crisis. The US Secretary of State John Kerry and the British Foreign Minister William Hague met yesterday in a bid to broker a conference with rebel leaders in Rome. The Syrian opposition initially said it would boycott the talks because of what it said was the world's silence over the violence, but agreed after the US and the UK promised aid.
The basic role of forming a government needs to be built on specific ground, and it needs agreement. Governments are not established for conflicts or splits. Any transitional government should be based on one concept, that there should be one government which leads the country and finds a peaceful solution that helps the country's transition from the current state to a democratic one.
But as the terms of the talks are being penciled in, the fighting continues. The uprising against President Bashar al-Assad is now nearly 2 years old. The world will be hoping for a breakthrough in Syria to end the violence. Heather Scott, Arise News.
We go now live to Washington and our very own Colin Campbell. It seems like Secretary of State John Kerry's weighing in on Syria yesterday may have been a bit of a game changer, Colin. How has this visit been playing at home?
Well, obviously, this is a bit of good news for John Kerry and the White House, as this is the desired effect that they wanted for opposition groups to meet in Rome later this week. So right now, the White House hasn't made any official statements about the acceptance by these groups, but we do know that they are happy that they decided to meet with John Kerry. I mean, this was the desired effect. They did say that they were going to come up with new strategies. We're not sure what those strategies are, and the biggest question that many are analyzing right now is if this means the United States will provide arms to opposition groups. This is something that John Kerry had brought up when he was a senator, is providing arms for opposition groups. Of course, the U.S. has been very reluctant to do that because they're not sure what groups would be carrying these arms, if they are groups that would be unfriendly to the United States later on. So that's why there's been this reluctance to provide really solid aid and munitions to these groups. So that's what we're waiting to hear. That's the biggest question in Washington right now. And maybe that's what will be unveiled later this week.
Probably well-placed caution there. Now, Colin, of course, the gun control debate rages on in the U.S. We've talked about it many times. One of those proposals have been to arm teachers, allow them to bring guns into their classrooms. How do teachers feel about that?
Well, this has been one of the biggest discussions going across the nation right now. And a new poll just came out today, the results from the School Improvement Network, which showed that 3 out of 4 teachers would not bring guns into school if they were allowed to do so. Only about 36% of those polled, this is a poll that interviewed or surveyed more than 10,000 teachers, almost 11,000 teachers nationwide. Only 36% of them said that they would own a gun, but only 1 out of 3 of those teachers said they would actually bring that gun into the classroom. And we've been looking at schools across the nation. Many school systems would not and do not allow teachers or staff members to carry arms into the class, although we have seen a couple small districts in the country that have allowed their principal or their superintendent to carry a gun into the classroom. But this is, of course, very limited in scope, and not too many teachers are in favor of this. Of course, this is a big discussion after the shootings in December at Sandy Hook and Newtown, Connecticut. And as many staff and administrators look for ways to secure their classrooms, this is a very big discussion for local law enforcement, for cities, and the federal government.
Let's turn the corner a little bit. Here are 6 words that I never thought I would say in the same sentence. Dennis Rodman, Harlem Globetrotters, Pyongyang, North Korea. That's 7 words. Forgive me for my miscount. But an unlikely combination, right?
It sure is. It sounds very, very unlikely from the onset, but looking at some of the details, maybe not too unlikely. That's right, we've got Dennis Rodman, nicknamed the Worm, known for his flamboyant style and his playing style, sometimes his hyper-aggressiveness on the court. We've got 3 Harlem Globetrotters and a correspondent from the Vice Network. They are over there, they're meeting with the leader, Kim Jong-un, who is actually a Bulls fan and is very fond of Dennis Rodman's play during the 1990s when the Bulls won all of those championships. They are actually there to not only put together a TV show that will air, of course, later this year on HBO, but they are there to put on a basketball clinic. So they're going to be embraced by some of the locals there, part of the celebrity embrace, and they're also going to be being a part of the basketball ambassadorship to North Korea and show that there are some friendly ties between the U.S. and North Korea, even if the governments between North Korea and the U.S. don't quite get along, especially after that alleged 3rd nuclear test by North Korea just a few days ago. One of the locals was shown a picture of Dennis Rodman with his nose rings and his makeup, and they said, one of them remarked reportedly that he looked like a monster, but I'm sure that a lot of them will be embracing the Worm when they see his more soft-spoken side, and especially since he's going to be putting on a basketball clinic for a lot of the kids there.
I'm sure they'll be as mesmerized as we have been all these years. Colin Campbell, thank you so much. We'll see you again soon.
Yeah.
All right, Jeff.
And here's a reminder, you're with the Arise News Hour. Our main headlines today. The second and final presidential debate in Kenya has left the 2 leading candidates, Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta, neck and neck with less than a week to go before polling.
Call for mass action.
In Mali, the Islamic insurgents have continued their guerrilla campaign in the mountains of the north of the country. The French say it could be a protracted campaign. And there are fears for the financial markets after the election in Italy, which left no clear winner. Italy's economy has faced pressure during the recession and the problems of the euro.
And also ahead, and also in Italy, a hero's welcome for footballer Diego Maradona. He's arrived in Rome to face questions about his taxes.
Now, former U.S. President Bill Clinton has urged Nigeria to do more against poverty in its Muslim north, to halt bombings and kidnappings by Islamic extremists. Speaking in Abeokuta in southeastern Nigeria, President Clinton said the country has not always used its vast resources wisely, and he warned that poverty can be a cause of violence and instability.
President Clinton's helicopter touching down today in the grounds of a school in Abeokuta, southwest Nigeria. Once the most powerful man in the world, still one of the most influential, the former US leader had come to honour the humble, teachers, the people with the capacity, he said, not just to change Nigeria, but the world.
And today, honouring teachers is the most important thing of all, so I'm very pleased to be here.
Clinton was attending the This Day Awards, organised by Nigeria's This Day newspaper, a partner of Arise News, to celebrate the achievements of the nation's educators.
Teachers are now being recognised and are being placed in their position of state where they should be.
If you empower a youth today, you are empowering the nation. And what the governor is doing, you can see the education section. Most of the school is now brand new. You see the teachers, they encourage them, they give them training, they give them counseling books, they encourage them to do better. And now everything is moving progressively.
It's good to honor our teachers because they are here to lead us. So when the leaders write, we need to honor them, at least to give them the respect.
This Day publisher and the awards host, Nduka Obaibena, asked Clinton about President Obama's perceived inattention to Africa.
I think that it wasn't so much that Africa was omitted as that the economy of America was in terrible shape, and he had to devote a lot of attention to that. And he believed that he had to end the war in Iraq and begin to wind down our involvement in Afghanistan before he could have an affirmative foreign policy.
In a wide-ranging conversation, Clinton spoke about Nigeria's reliance on oil and the upcoming challenge Nigeria and the world will face to feed a growing population.
You have about 3 big challenges. First of all, like 90% of the countries who have one big resource, you haven't done very well with your oil money. You should have reinvested it in different ways. Now you are at least not wasting the natural gas. You are developing that and sending it in pipelines. You've got to do a better job of managing natural resources. Secondly, you have to somehow bring economic opportunity to the people who don't have it.
The teachers were clearly thrilled to be receiving recognition from such an internationally prominent figure who had travelled so far to applaud them. Gavin Hill, Arise News.
And just a reminder, you're watching the News Hour here on Arise. Now for a roundup of the other stories that are making the news today. Tragedy in Egypt. 19 tourists are dead after their balloon exploded in midair and crashed to the ground near the ancient city of Luxor. The victims are thought to be from Britain, Japan, and China. 3 people survived the accident. And progress in the hunt for Chakri Belaid's killer. Tunisian authorities say they've arrested 4 Salafist extremists in connection with the secular opposition leader's murder. The main suspect is still on the run. Belaid's shooting at the start of this month. sparked unrest in Tunisia, the birthplace of the Arab Spring. And at least 8 people have died, most of them civilians, after fighting between rival factions of the M23 Congolese rebel group. The violence threatens to undermine peace talks between the M23 insurgents and the DRC government. An M23 spokesman denies there's any tension within its ranks.
Well, let's turn our attention to business, and it looks like the political deadlock in Italy has reignited fears about the Eurozone debt crisis, as always.
Certainly has, yes. If you take a look at the markets, you'll see that, you take a number of views about this, quite honestly. If you're a bull, you look at it all and you say, well, it's part of a healthy consolidation after a very overconfident run in equities. If you're a bear, then you take the view that the market's actually finally recognising that there's something quite seriously wrong with everything. Italy's benchmark had no winners whatsoever. The FTSE MIB down over 4%, biggest fall in 6 months. Either way, it's all very divisive, really. The cost of insuring European bank debt, for example, has risen to its highest in 3 months. Now, the euro actually strengthened slightly at one point from a 7-week low against the dollar, but the near-term future of the common currency is pretty volatile. The dollar's looking attractive. Sterling fell once again, this time nearing a 2.5-year low against the dollar, after the central bank policymaker said the UK's real exchange rate needs to fall. Now, investors are watching the Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke as he begins 2 days of questioning in Congress. On Wall Street, stocks are recovering after yesterday's big sell-off. That's thanks to some better-than-expected economic data. Well, for more, let's cross live to our US business editor, Andrew Schmertz in New York. Andrew, of course, there was a lot of contagion last night, wasn't there, or at least our last night, when those figures were coming through from Italy. It seems as though the market's got a bit of a grip, but it's interesting how these worries have hit Wall Street once again.
Well, Michael, the markets just do not like instability. And following the Italian election results, instability is exactly what they have. The concern here, as you've been reporting, is that Italy is going to slow down or delay altogether the economic reforms that it had been pursuing. Groups opposing those reforms won a surprisingly large number of seats in parliament. So right now they have gridlock government. The markets, especially U.S. markets, really don't like that sort of insecurity and volatility. And we saw that on the volatility index, for example. The VIX index jumped surprisingly high yesterday. As you mentioned, stocks are starting to recover a little bit. So the key here, however, is why do the markets care more about Italy than, say, Greece, which went through this just about a half a year ago? The answer is that Italy has a much bigger economy, and its impact on the Eurozone will be felt far greater. So the market is closely watching the Italian election results. Stocks have come back a little bit. People probably seeing some buying opportunities there. You know, the markets are short-term thinkers. They react very, very strongly on negative news.
Indeed so. But it's good news, though, from the domestic economy in the United States with Home Depot, isn't it? What does that say about the housing business?
You know, hurricanes are good for the home construction industry if you're in that industry. Home Depot reporting stronger than expected fourth quarter earnings for a couple of reasons. One, the company says that following Hurricane Sandy, which devastated the Northeast, a lot of people had all of that insurance money coming to them and they've started to rebuild. The second is that we're starting to see, increased home sales and home buying and building, and that has helped spur some development through Home Depot there. So Home Depot increasing its dividend and its buyback program. Home Depot, by the way, now far outpacing its competitor Lowe's.
Okay, is Ben Bernanke telling people what they want to hear this morning?
Well, Ben Bernanke had 2 key points in front of Congress today. First, easy money is going to continue. He will keep interest rates low. The Fed says it's going to keep its policy in place until the employment picture continues to improve. The second is he's telling Congress to get its act together and pass a budget. He says sequestration, deep spending cuts, along with higher taxes, will create some significant headwinds into 2013. So we'll see if they adhere to the Fed's views on these points. But the market's liking what they're hearing from the Fed chairman.
Andrew Schmertz, thanks very much indeed. Tens of thousands of visitors are gathering in Barcelona this week for a taste of technology with their tapas. The Spanish city is hosting its annual Mobile World Congress, the biggest phone fair on the planet, and the focus is increasingly shifting to emerging markets like Africa. Sarah Hemramjani has the story.
70,000 tech fans are expected to check out the latest generation of handsets and tablets. With HD cameras, slimmer touchscreens, and a new range of apps, smartphones are turning science fiction into reality. But exhibitors at the Mobile World Congress say that not all of their gadgets need to cost a small fortune. Many are eyeing customers in developing countries. Africa has proven to be the fastest growing region, and companies are coming up with different ways to meet this demand. A French startup has invented a solar-powered charging device ideal for the continent's conditions.
It is a continent that less than 40% have electricity, which means that people need the energy to recharge their mobile phones, in particular for banking and transactions related to health, and therefore our technology will achieve full autonomy in those markets.
Another firm hoping to make a connection is Spare One, which has a reassuringly back-to-basics approach to mobile phones.
This is the Spare One, the only phone in the world that works with a normal battery, which means I can use any battery that I have at home to turn on the phone and make a call. Spare One is an emergency phone, because the battery can keep charged for 15 years.
Maybe this emerging market of cheap and cheerful handsets will find a ready audience among the millions who can't afford today's fancy phones. Sarah Hemrajani, Arise News.
Now into the Department of the Unreal. Yahoo's chief executive, Marissa Mayer, has banned her employees from working from home. A memo to employees said, to become the absolute best place in the world, communication and collaboration will be important, so we need to be working side by side. Hundreds of remote Yahoo workers have now been asked to report to the office from the 1st of June. Got plenty of time to get back there, haven't they? Marissa Mayer's edict has rankled supporters of workplace flexibility, including Virgin boss Richard Branson. He tweeted that he was perplexed by Yahoo's decision. He said, "Give people the freedom of where to work and they will excel." Yeah, on his private island wouldn't be bad, would it? I wouldn't mind.
It's easy for him to say, right?
It's what we call skiving. I threw that word in earlier. You don't know what's that's skiving. Bunking off.
Yeah, or
throwing a sickie,
goofing off,
all that kind of stuff. But working from home is very, very different. The important thing I found when I was working from home is to get dressed.
Yes.
You know, don't hang around in your pajamas and stuff. And have office hours, and don't get distracted, and don't spend half your time in the kitchen making cups of coffee, or indeed feeding the cats.
And do you know what I used to call it?
But
working from home.
Good for you. This woman is not in the real world, is she? I mean, not you, her, Marissa.
Right. We'll see if she sticks to that decision. Michael, thank you so much. Well, we want to return to our lead story tonight. With less than a week to go before Kenyans head to the polls on the 4th of March, much of the population is eager to avoid a repeat of the deadly violence that followed the last polls in 2007. And as Arise News' Sarah Head reports, many murals and concerts have been organized to provide a more positive and cultural outlet for Kenyan political passions.
There are posters on every spare space of wall in Kibera, Nairobi's biggest slum. Dozens of candidates all competing in next week's election. As well as endless pictures of politicians, huge murals have sprung up, all of which have the same message. There should be no repeat of the violence that saw Kibera nearly burned to the ground after the last election 5 years ago.
We decided to select the walls that are along the way, along these major pathways, especially in the slums, whereby many people pass by, so when they pass, they can read the message, and the message is gotten right into them.
The Kibera Walls for Peace project is just one of numerous peace initiatives and events that have taken place across Kenya in the past few months. They even painted a train that passes through Nairobi. In Naivasha in the Rift Valley, where some of the bloodiest violence took place, a peace walk through the town brought together different communities and youth groups.
This was one of the most hit areas in the country, and it really affected the people. And now, as we are drawing near to the election, want to spread the gospel of peace. We've dubbed our walk as A Peaceful Kenya Starts With Me.
More than 1,000 people died, and hundreds of thousands were displaced after the results of the last elections were hit by allegations of fraud. Political protests sparked ethnic conflict that quickly turned into brutal violence. Peace concerts like this one are taking place across the country, promoting a message of unity and restraint. Amani means peace in Swahili.
You know, we had violence, and somebody preached violence that time. That's why we had violence in 2007, 2008. So right now, everybody should preach peace, so that even if there's somebody who is planning to do any violence, they have some peace installed in them.
Ethnic divisions are still rife in Kenya. Almost 500 people were killed in tribal clashes last year. So it's impossible to predict what will happen after the first round of the election on March 4th. But with widespread efforts to promote peace across the country, it's hoped there'll be no repeat of the violence of past elections. Sarah Head, Arise News.
On to Arise News Sports now, and legendary footballer Diego Maradona arrived in Italy yesterday to answer questions about his tax liabilities. As the Argentine arrived at Rome Airport, he was surrounded by journalists and fans and had to be accompanied by security officials to a waiting car. The footballer is thought to have built up a tax bill of, get this, 40 million euros. Former England manager Steve McLaren has quit as coach of Dutch team FC Twente following a run of poor results. The split comes after a 2-1 defeat at Heerenveen that left Twente fifth in the Dutch league. And as Debbie mentioned earlier, members of the Harlem Globetrotters have begun a historic trip to North Korea. The Americans, including the unmistakable figure of Dennis Rodman, are out to engage in what they call a little basketball diplomacy. Rodman and the Globetrotters are filming a documentary that will be setting up basketball camps for young children across the country.
Well, football fans around the world are gearing up to watch Barcelona and Madrid do battle at the Nou Camp tonight. It's the Copa del Rey semifinal, and with the scores already locked at 1-1, there's still everything to play for. It's time for another installment of El Clásico. All right, it's going to be an epic game, and here to talk more about it is Ife Fatanasi, our intrepid sports reporter. Should this be the last game?
Well, normally this game is actually the final. It's normally when these two sides meet in the Copa del Rey, they usually meet in the final. So it's a bit of a shame that this time it's not the final, but it's actually, because in the last few years they have been meeting in the final for the Copa del Rey, it makes a change. But let me quickly tell you something. A few years ago, I used to run a sports bar in Madrid. And this game was the bane of my life. I tell you, every time these two sides met, I would have to triple the amount of staff that came into the bar because such was the interest in the amount of people that came in to watch this match. It was absolutely mental. If you weren't a sports fan and you walked on the streets of Madrid, there would be absolutely no one on the streets. Such was how this game was. But in the last few years, though, that kind of because of Barcelona's dominance in the league, in the La Liga, and pretty much around Europe, there hasn't been that much interest in this game, and they've dominated. So neutral fans don't really watch it. But if you're a Barcelona fan or a Real Madrid fan, they would be my bar tonight watching the game.
when you look at the bigger picture, Ife, Barcelona are what, 16 points clear? They are way ahead in this league, aren't they? I mean, there's no stopping this team.
Yeah, they've got totally ahead. So the actual main problem is Real Madrid. Now they've got a bit of a bad run ahead of them. So tonight they meet Barcelona in the Copa del Rey. However, on Saturday they meet Barcelona yet again, but this time in La Liga. And then a week tonight, in fact, they meet Manchester United in the second round of the Champions League. So it's a really tough 8 days that they've got ahead of them. Saturday, the manager, Jose Mourinho, he will actually be looking beyond, after tonight's game, he'll be looking beyond Saturday's game because they're already 16 points adrift, as you say, so there's no chance of them catching Barcelona. So he'll be looking beyond that. You'll probably see it reflected in the side he puts out on Saturday. He's looking ahead to Manchester United, so he's got to get through this game, and then he's looking ahead to next Tuesday's game with Manchester United, they can stay in the Champions League. Now, it's actually their 110th birthday next Wednesday. So next Wednesday, they will be hoping to celebrate being in the Copa del Rey final and still in the Champions League. However, depending on how these next 8 days go, they could actually spend their birthday being out of the Copa del Rey and out of the Champions League and with no title at all because they've already lost the league.
Wow. I remember last week in the Champions League, AC Milan versus Barcelona, you predicted Barcelona would win or at least scrape through. They were hammered. It was a terrible game.
It was. I can't believe you brought that up.
How rude of you. How rude. How's your confidence for predicting tonight?
Well, based on my predictions last week, I am not sticking my neck out, but I will say Barcelona are actually on a 22-match run at the Nou Camp, which they've won the last 22 games they've played at the Nou Camp. But saying that, in their last 6 games with Real Madrid, they've only won once. And this man behind me, he's in the last 7 games, he's scored 7 goals. So it's going to be it'll be close.
Last time you were praising Messi, now you're praising that guy behind you?
I'm praising that guy behind me. Well, it's Messi versus Ronaldo, so we'll see how we get on.
And when it comes to Jose Mourinho, is this his last season? Is he leaving after the end of the season?
No contract's been signed, and everyone expects this to be his last season. Every time he does an interview these days, he's always when they ask him, oh, what did you love about England? He says, I loved everything. So you can see where his mind is going. I think he wants to come back to the Premiership. Is the Premier League, sorry. He's looking for a club here. I think this season is goodbye Mourinho for Real Madrid. But this is why he has to really win. He has to win a title for them this year.
Excellent. All right, Ife, thank you. And by the way, when you said you used to run a bar, it got the attention of our entire control room.
What was the name of the bar?
It was Kitty O'Shea's.
Kitty O'Shea's.
I think we need pictures next time.
I'll bring.
All right, Ife, thank you. All right, Lunar New Year celebrations are drawing to a close in ethnic Chinese communities around the world.
In China, farmers mark the end of the Lantern Festival with a rare and dangerous ritual. Tanya Lee reports from Hubei, that's right, Hubei province, the only place in the world where fireworks are replaced by molten metal lobbed against a cold, hard wall.
这个树火也就是以前这个老百姓们没的，他这个社火，历史留下那个过年耍社火的时候，他的没钱的人都拿这个就是做那个民俗社火来留下。
世界上只有中国只有雨蟹暖泉有，可以说这是世界是唯一的用铁水化到1600多度，而且都用木头来打这个树火，那就是唯一的。
Wow, it really is amazing.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. It's
dangerous
incredible.
too.
Do you remember what year you were born?
I remember my sign.
Your Chinese sign?
Yeah, I'm a horse.
You're a horse.
Michael here said I was a horse.
Yeah,
I take his word for it.
Yeah, bull, snake.
You're a snake.
Yeah.
Snake, firm, resolute. And this is going to be your year for making a lot of money. That's what I told you.
I love the sound of that.
And just on that, the lantern thing that they have is really to appease Tai, who was the god of heaven. I say was. I know God's supposed to be, all the time, but this is started. And what they used to do was that, you see, Tai used to visit the earth with his 16 dragons. And if people had been naughty, they used to get floods, used to get disease, used to get pestilence and fire. So that's why they lit all those lanterns to say, please don't visit those on us or your 16 dragons as a sort of like a gift, like a nice thing to do for Tyee. It's quite cute, that, isn't it, really?
That is pretty interesting.
I don't know whether they still do that anymore, but have you ever done that thing with the old lanterns, you know, putting the candles in and letting them go?
No, but I think it's absolutely beautiful. It's really very pretty. I'm sure that a lot of Chinese culture have rituals for the new year.
Yeah.
So I'm making a bit of a turn. So for our new year,
yes,
do you have rituals, traditions that you
I
do?
try to go to bed very early. I can't stand New Year because it reminds me of days passing. I prefer Christmas. But what do you do for good luck over New Year? Do you put some?
Well, the tradition in the U.S. is you're supposed to eat black-eyed peas on New Year's Eve, and that's supposed to bring you good luck in the new year. You think that's a Southern thing?
All right, we need to wrap this.
Good luck to you all, eh?
All right.
and also they get drunk.
We're going to leave you with pictures of that Chinese New Year, Year of the Snake.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.
Good night.